Hey, this episode contains strong language. Just a heads up.
That was a beautiful day. The water was sparkling, everything was magical.
It's August, 1993. Jane McMillan is on the water in Pomkit Harbor in Nova Scotia. She's with her boyfriend, Donald. She calls him Junior.
The fishing was really, really good, and we would stay a couple of nights, check the nets for a few days, and we had the most eels that we had ever caught by the time August 24th came around, and we were getting very excited.
The couple has been fishing all summer, trying to make some extra cash to keep gas in their truck, pay off some bills, and hopefully have a bit left over for a couple of beers. And on this day, the haul is looking really good. But they're not the only boat on the water.
The Department of Fisheries and Oceans approached our boat. We're like, what do they want? They came over and said, what are you doing? And we're fishing eels. Where's your license? And we didn't have a license. Junior says, I don't need a license. I've got a treaty.
Donald is Mi'kmaq, and he believes that a treaty signed centuries ago guarantees his right to fish. And the people on the boat in front of him? Well, they see things differently. What neither side knows is that they've waded into a war that will change fishing in Canada.
War, I would say. It'd be civil war or whatever they want to call it. Something's going to happen.
The fishermen there, they were met with violence. There was fisheries officers who were ramming their boats, and it was awful.
They were all around us. They were cutting traps left and right in front of us. I mean, it just goes to show who's civilized and who ain't.
I'm Falen Johnson, and this is See You in Court, a podcast about the cases that changed Canada. Today, the case of Donald Marshall Jr., and how he put himself on the line to defend the treaty rights of his people. To understand this story, you're going to need to know more about Donald Marshall, because this fishing fight isn't his first brush with the justice system. It's late, just before midnight in the spring of 1971, and 17-year-old Donald is walking through a park in Sydney, Nova Scotia.
I was going down there to start with look for Indian guys. That's where we hung out, and that's what I was doing, going down there and looking around, right? And I happened to bump into a Sandy seal.
Donald knows Sandy. He's a teen from a nearby town. As they walk through the park, they are approached by two men. There's a short exchange, and then things take a turn.
It was here on the night of May 28, 1971, that Sandy Seal was stabbed to death. At the time of
and Donald is charged with Sandy's murder. Donald says that he didn't stab Sandy, that they were friends. The all-white jury sees it differently. It takes just 4 hours to convict him of murder. He weeps as the verdict is read. Donald is locked up, far from his community and his family. Years later, he describes it like this.
When I first experienced a prison, I was terrified, looking at the building, what the hell, It's like going on the noose, you know what I mean? Your death sentence is right there, that's the way it felt to me.
In prison, he battles depression, substance abuse, but he never admits guilt. And then, after 11 years behind bars,
new evidence surfaced. Evidence proving Marshall was innocent. Marshall was released from the Dorchester Penitentiary in New Brunswick. The courts confessed an error had been made.
Another man is convicted of Sandy's murder, a man named Roy Ebsery.
How are your feelings now that Mr. Ebsery has been convicted? How do you feel about it?
I don't think it's over. I think it's only about halfway done.
And he's right. It's not over. His story sparks national news and a public outcry. A royal commission finds that
the criminal justice system failed Donald Marshall Jr. at virtually every turn,
and that racism
was a significant contributing factor to the miscarriage of justice.
Donald gets a settlement, and he tries to have a normal life. He reconnects with friends, family, and spends time with elders. He's got a lot to make up for.
I learned about his story when I was driving to move to Nova Scotia from Ontario.
This is Jane McMillan, Donald's longtime partner in life and in fishing. Back in 1991, Jane was in her early 20s. She's non-Indigenous and from Ontario, and she's never heard his name, doesn't know his story, until she takes a road trip to Halifax with her mom.
We had stopped in Rivière-du-Loup and stayed in a funky little motel. And my mom was watching Justice Denied, which was the story of Junior's wrongful conviction. So that's how I really learned of him, through that movie. A few weeks later, I go to the Misty Moon Cabaret, and it's a Jeff Healey concert. And he was doing the Angel Eyes tour, and a mutual acquaintance introduced Donald to me,
and she realizes who it is. It's the guy from that movie she just watched with her mom.
He was very soft-spoken and gentle and sweet, almost timid and funny, subtly charismatic in an interesting way. And that was it. He bought me a rose and a drink, called me Jean for a few weeks. And that was it. That was the love story. It was Jeff Healey brought us together.
They date. Jane focuses on school, and Donald goes fishing.
Junior really, really enjoyed the magnificence of having connection to the water, and operating in peace and having a purpose and having a job, right, that was respected amongst his family and his community and his nation. So he was always asked for eels wherever we went. No matter where we went, people were saying, "Hey, you got any eels, Junior? I got any eels?" And whenever elders asked for them, he'd clean them up.
For the Mi'kmaq, eel are a food source. They are medicine, and they've been harvested and shared in the community for as long as anyone can remember. Donald asks Jane to help out on the boat. Soon, the couple gets into the rhythm of fishing, and it's going well. And then, that August day happens, when the Department of Fisheries and Oceans stops them on the water. The day Junior tells them that he doesn't need a license to fish, like non-Indigenous people do, that he has a treaty right.
And the DFO officer says, "Well, we don't know anything about treaties. What's your name? What's your address?" And so we gave them our names and our address, and they asked us if they could take a net. Or for what? And they said, for evidence. Evidence of what?
This has never happened to Donald and Jane. The DFO have come by and checked on them, but they've never taken their gear before. Donald and Jane are left with one less net and a lot of questions. But at least they have their catch.
So we sold the eels. It was a great day. That was a big check for us.
They make over $700. But then, a month later,
2 members of the Department of Fisheries and Oceans come knocking on our door and hand us the charges.
The charges? Fishing without a license, selling eels without a license, and fishing out of season. But the thing is, getting busted by the DFO is exactly what some people are trying to do. Before we get to what happens next, we need to go back to the 1700s. Stay with me. That's when the peace and friendship treaties were signed. These agreements were made between First Nations on the East Coast and the British, and they outline how these nations will coexist alongside each other and what's allowed in terms of trading. In the treaties, there's something called the Truck House Clause. A truck house is a kind of mobile trading post. This was where back in the day, First Nations folks could trade items that they had hunted, fished, or gathered with Europeans. As time went on, other laws took over. Rules were made around conservation, when you could hunt, fish, and how you could trade.
It never stopped our people because they were their own conservation law. Here in Mi'kmaq country, we have this belief of Nadugulink. We only take what we need.
This is Dan Christmas. He's Mi'kmaq from Member 2, Donald's community. In the early 90s, Dan is the director of the Union of Nova Scotia Indians. Dan says that the Mi'kmaq had to find ways around these new conservation rules. They would fish and hunt in secret. All of that sounds really familiar to me. I'm First Nations from Six Nations in southern Ontario, and I grew up around fishers. My dad's one, and he still goes fishing. And I get the sense from him that even today, where and when you fish can be slippery. Back in the 80s and 90s, some Mi'kmaq fishers and hunters got caught, and they ended up in court. And they often used the peace and friendship treaties as the backbone of their defense. And it worked. Some Mi'kmaq won their cases to hunt, to fish, and to harvest.
So it was at that point that our people began to openly go fishing, because here's a court decision that said it's legal. You have an Aboriginal right to fish. But the line in the sand was that the DFO said you can only fish for food.
So you could catch for yourself, but you couldn't sell. And this is becoming a sticking point for Mi'kmaq fishers.
We were getting complaints of fishermen who were being harassed whenever they tried to sell their fish. But nobody was charged, strangely enough.
Dan says local chiefs actually wanted someone to get charged because then they could test the issue in court.
And so we began to organize a protest fishery. We had a group of fishermen who volunteered to be charged. It was in the fall time, so the best fishery at the time was the fall salmon run. We notified DFO. We wanted them to be there to charge people, and we even invited the media to come witness our fishing protest. The only problem is we forgot to invite the salmon. The guys couldn't catch anything, so I was so embarrassed.
But they have the press conference anyway. The hotel boardroom is packed with lawyers, media, and then
Donald Marshall Jr. walked in the back of the room.
And Junior would often sit in their meetings and, just go hang out and nosy, as he would say. I'm just going to go nosy what's going on here.
But Junior didn't like media attention because of the previous thing that happened to him. And so he sat patiently in the back of the room until everyone's gone. And then he came forward.
He said, from the back of the room, I've been charged.
And he brought out the summons that he was charged for selling eels. We couldn't believe our eyes and ears. This was Donald Marshall Jr., a huge celebrity. Once we saw the charge, we saw it as the perfect test case.
The perfect test case for whether a centuries-old treaty means Mi'kmaq fishers today can sell what they catch. So Donald and the chiefs start talking. They offer to pay for Donald's legal costs, but it means he'll have to plead guilty.
It involved Junior having to return to court after having an undescribable nightmare of circumstances happening with him with his wrongful conviction.
But he was the son of a Grand Chief, and he felt the burden of the nation that, yes, I should step forward and go back to the courts. As much as he hated the justice system and even all that reluctance to go back, he had the courage.
And so it's decided. They're going to court. It's 1994, and Donald Marshall Jr. is at the Nova Scotia Provincial Court in Antigonish. Dan's there too. The legal team argues that the peace and friendship treaties protect the Mi'kmaq right to fish and to sell that catch.
We had expert witnesses. We have tons of documents, historical documents, and so did the Crown.
The Crown argues that the peace and friendship treaties do not grant any commercial fishing rights to the Mi'kmaq. And if the court decides that the Mi'kmaq do have a treaty right to a commercial fishery, the Crown still has the right to regulate the fishery.
And it was days upon days upon days of going through historical documents and hearing testimony from witnesses. So that summer was long. That was a long, long summer.
And when the hearings wrap?
We felt pretty confident. But I think the judge knew this was going to be a game changer. This was going to turn the whole Atlantic fishery upside down.
The court decision comes down in late June of 1996.
The courthouse was packed. Many, many, many allies from the Mi'kmaq Nation came out. Chiefs, counselors, friends, family. There was media everywhere.
He found Junior guilty, despite the overwhelming evidence. We were pretty disappointed.
The court finds that, yes, treaties gave the Mi'kmaq the right to bring what they hunted, fished, and gathered to trade at the truck houses, those trading posts from the 1700s. But the ruling says the truck house system is long gone, and these treaties don't give Donald the right to sell fish today.
That was a really bad day.
But they keep going. Donald's team appeals, and
the Court of Appeal found Junior guilty again.
Our hearts were broken because there was some sense that the justice has to be done. They can't have another miscarriage of justice involving Donald Marshall Jr.
And so the next step was, of course, to seek leave to appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada.
But does Donald have it in him to take this battle to the highest court of Canada?
He just really wanted to retreat from that. I mean, the whole point of going fishing was a retreat. It was peace. It was connection with culture. It was all of the things that were deep into his ancestral being. And going to court is not that. So a lot of hours on a very hard bench, and he would say, "Oh, my bony ass can't take this anymore."
There are other things that are making court difficult for Donald.
By this time, he had a chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and that was evolving into a really bad emphysema. And so these were very difficult, taxing times on his health. So it was up to, Junior, do you want to continue the fight? Are you ready? Do you have it in you? And he said, "I've beat them before. I'm going to do it again."
It's the fall of 1998, 5 years since that beautiful day eel fishing in Pomkit Harbor. Now, Donald's bony ass is sitting on the hard benches of the Supreme Court of Canada. The arguments from the lawyers are much the same as in the lower courts. But for Dan, this time, something feels different.
I remember the questions from the justices, and they were right on top of the case. And the Crown was struggling to provide good answers. And I could tell by the faces for some of the justices that they were pretty skeptical that the Crown had made their case. I remember leaving and thinking to myself, we got this.
But the courts had upheld these charges 2 other times, and the Canadian justice system had wrongfully convicted Donald before. And so, they wait. And almost a year later, the verdict comes.
I was in British Columbia, and I was watching the news, and Junior called as he got the message about what had happened with the decision. And so we're on the phone, coast to coast.
And they find out Donald won.
We're overcome with joy and jumping up and down, and I can hear him, and he's got tears, I'm in tears, and you won, and the nation won. And just the straitjacket of being involved in the court was finally being undone. And so I think that there was just a rush of freedom and liberty and joy on that day, on September 17th, 1999. It was a big exhale. Yeah.
At a press conference later that day, Donald sounds relieved.
It's been a hard struggle for us, but hard work pays off at the end. I dealt with bigger problems, and I dealt with the media, and I dealt with the courts before. I never thought I'd be in a spotlight again. I'm trying to live a normal life, and it's not funny. I don't think anything's normal around here. But to me, give myself a pat on the shoulder because I'm a Micmac and proud to be a Micmac, and I will stand up with them as far as we can go. And I think we stood all the way up. I'm just glad it's over with. And like I said, I don't want to see Supreme Court of Canada again.
The court's decision states that the Mi'kmaq and other First Nations in the Maritimes and parts of Quebec have a treaty right to fish, hunt, and gather in pursuit of what the court calls a moderate livelihood. It's called the Marshall Decision.
It affirmed who we are as a Mi'kmaq, our way of life, our not only to fish for food, but to trade. I think all of us knew that our lives wouldn't be the same again, and they weren't.
But when the Marshall Decision is tested in the real world, things get confusing and ugly. After the court ruling, some Mi'kmaq people want to test out these newly recognized treaty rights. Out in the open for all to see, they go lobster fishing.
On shore, the white fishermen feel helpless. As a non-native, they can't set a trap until the start of the season in a couple of months. Lawrence O'Neill wonders if there'll be enough lobsters left by then.
Yeah, be the same as, it's about the same as going home to supper, no nothing on your plate. There ain't gonna be nothing.
Less than a month after the Supreme Court ruling, this happens.
They're images that have grabbed the attention of the country. A small boat with native fishers is run down by a larger federal patrol boat. As the smaller boat begins to sink, the other turns and comes at it again, forcing the people on board to leap into the water.
It happens off the coast of New Brunswick and is quickly dubbed the Burnt Church Crisis. On October 3rd, 1999, around 150 boats manned by non-Indigenous fishers head out on the water in protest. The DFO says the Mi'kmaq are breaking conservation laws and they need to maintain order on the water. Things quickly turn violent. Gear is damaged and destroyed. Boats are rammed and sunk. The Mi'kmaq fight back. It's hard to watch.
There's going to be lives lost the way they're handling it right now.
Danny Ward also ended up in the water yesterday. Here, he and his fishing partner Terry Dorward are run down by a government boat. Moments later, Ward's boat has disappeared beneath the waves, the men are in the water, and one officer appears to lean out of his boat and beat Dorward with a baton.
Atlantic Canada is on edge.
The racism that had always been percolating really came to the surface. And so whenever Junior started going out in public, whether he was in Sydney or in Halifax or whatever, people started confronting him, saying that, oh, you've taken the food out of my children's mouths. And it was very disorienting because here we'd had this major win, a major victory for Indigenous treaty rights. And the reaction from settler society was completely hostile.
And it's disorienting for non-Indigenous fishers, too.
Why did the Supreme Court Justice ever dump something like that in our laps, in the natives' laps, with not one concern about the impact this was going to have on these community-based societies, you know?
This is not what Donald wanted. Something he makes clear in a CBC interview in the middle of the crisis.
Christ, I think I'm having more problems here dealing with this whole issue than my own murder trial, and that's pretty. I'm saying a lot of talk here.
It's a tough one.
It is a tough one, and I really feel sorry for everybody that's involved because nobody's got the answer, and all the answer was we went to the Supreme Court of Canada and we fought for our treaty rights.
Donald speaks to the communities involved, calling for peace on the water.
He was terrified that somebody was going to get killed and that he would get the blame for that. And that was a dark cloud over his head.
Not long after the Burnt Church crisis breaks out, the Supreme Court clarifies its ruling, reinforcing the federal government's power to regulate the fishery. And things do calm down. But Dan and Jane say the government has never fully implemented the spirit of the Marshall decision. Dan says instead of recognizing the treaty right to fish, the government started issuing temporary licenses to First Nations fishers, things that allowed fishing to happen, but still with government oversight.
That's not what Junior was looking for. We wanted recognition of our treaty right to trade. We were just being treated like non-Indigenous fishermen that didn't have any treaties. That's been hard. That's been hard on those of us who believe that Marshall was a victory. The government has pretty well stolen that victory. They've pretty well gutted it out. So the frustration still remains.
We reached out to Fisheries and Oceans Canada. In an email, the department says it's committed to, quote, upholding the right to fish in pursuit of a moderate livelihood, and we will continue to work in partnership with Indigenous communities to implement this right. DFO says its approach is consistent with the Marshall decisions. In 2006, Donald passes away. He had received a double lung transplant, and due to complications, he never fully recovers. At his funeral in Sydney, the church overflows with mourners, family, friends, and Indigenous leadership. He was just 55 years old. Today, decades later, conflicts are still popping up around fishing rights in Atlantic Canada. How to interpret the Marshall decision is still murky, but in his community, Donald's legacy is clear. In March of 2025, there's a gathering in Antigonish, all about eels. It's taking place not far from where Jane and Donald were stopped by the DFO all those years ago. A lot of young people here, like Caden Prosper, never met Donald, but they know what he did for the community.
You know, the eel was the animal that Donald Marshall was fishing when he got caught. It was a big breakthrough for our rights being recognized, and my kids will be able to fish them. My kids' kids, all of our kids' kids, you know, for those next generations.
Clifford Paul is there too. He's Donald's cousin, and he has vivid memories of Donald's journey through the courts.
He gave his life for the betterment of the justice system, good part of his young life, and he gave the rest of his life for the betterment of our families. So he leaves an incredible legacy. That's the ultimate gift, I guess. Give your life so that others can live better.
If you like this episode, share it with a friend. Recommendations really do work. Maybe you're here because a friend with really good taste sent it to you. And if you haven't checked out the other episodes, please do. We've got a bunch in our feed now. Coming up in our next episode, The case of the kid who took on his school for the right to wear his kirpan. This episode was hosted, written, and produced by me, Falen Johnson, with reporting from Sissa Mohan and story editing from Julia Poggle. Special thanks to Nick Maloney for additional voice work. Sam McNulty is our sound designer, Catherine Rolfson is our senior producer, Carla Hilton is our executive producer.